Hi, everyone. My name is Julia Friedlander at the GeoEconomics Center at the Atlantic Council, and I'm here with my colleague Moehr to chat with Philippa Sigl Glöckner from the Berlin think tank Dezernat Zukunft, focused on the future of German macroeconomic policy and the like. So we're very happy to have you here today to chat a little bit about what's coming in the coming months in Germany. It's obviously a very exciting time, but I might first, to the extent that you can, to discuss a little bit where Scholz himself might take fiscal policy especially in the gnarly coalition negotiations that are upcoming.
Sure, and thank you for having me. Quite exciting to talk across the Atlantic on this. So, I mean, it's going to be interesting, right? Because he's been finance minister before, so it's not exactly like people haven't seen him do fiscal policy before. And he's, in a way, portrayed himself very much as a continuation of Merkel in the campaign. On the other hand, German fiscal policy in the past has been quite restrictive. And in a way, as economics have changed, I think more and more people have asked questions whether German fiscal policy with the debt brake, which allows very limited deficit spending, or even the black zero. So, the political agreement that you have a balanced budget, whether that is still right in these times, especially considering COVID, and then all the needs for spending, looking at climate. My personal view would be, but I don't know where this lands, is that we would do a bit more deficit spending in the future just to deal with the climate needs and make sure Germany gets out of the COVID slump properly.
Thank you. And to what degree do you think that there are good compromises in the cards with the potential traffic light coalition? There's a lot of memes out about who's talking to whom these days, but from sort of not from a political perspective, but from the perspective of an economist, where do you see the potential synergies? Sure.
Actually, quite an interesting time, because I think the parties have moved quite a lot in recent times to actually make it a little bit easier. So I guess the biggest factor is fiscal policy, because you need that to, get something for everyone. And on fiscal policy, they've converged a little bit. So the SPD basically says, let's keep the debt brake, but otherwise do whatever is required. The Liberals, who used to be quite austere and like a black zero, so a balanced budget, have officially distanced themselves from that. So they say a balanced budget is ideological. There's no good economic reason for it. So they hold the position that they want to have the debt brake, and they do not want to reform the debt brake, but they don't see a need for a balanced budget. And then the Green Party has actually campaigned on amending the debt brake, not abolishing it, but amending it to allow for more investment. But from what I gather, it's not a make or break thing for them to amend the debt brake. They mainly want to make sure there's enough investment, climate friendly investment, so we reach our climate targets. So I do actually think that in substance, there's quite a lot of agreement. All parties want more climate investment. Most of them want to stick to the debt brake. I can't see that we will abolish the debt brake, also because of the second chamber of our parliament, which will never pass with a 2/3 majority, which you need for a constitutional change of the debt brake. So I think it's basically the consensus is, let's keep the debt brake and do more green investment under it. Maybe doing some smaller tweaks, but without changing the constitution. So I think on the fiscal side, actually, there is a possible agreement. Where obviously you have a bit of scope for disagreement is the Liberal Party traditionally wants to lower taxes. Social Democrats want to increase taxes. And then the Greens are somewhere in between, probably lowering taxes on green stuff, and then in social terms, maybe increase them. What I would think probably happens is that you land somewhere in between, which is not too much movement on taxation. And then I could imagine that, wherever it's very focused on the transformation, So for instance, faster depreciation of investment that is really focused on green investment, or maybe, cutting levies on electricity, which are very, very high in Germany, that could find a consensus, because basically, unless you want to balance the budget, there's no good reason not to do this. It would make it a lot easier for the Liberal Party to join a coalition, and it would help the transformation in Germany.
Thank you so much, Philippa. Sort of continuing on the theme of how the makeup of the coalition will influence policy, I wanted to ask a little bit about going more to the European-wide issues on the banking union, right? I mean, since the Euro crisis, there has been the constant theme, sort of the German taxpayer at the end of the day has to pay the tab for other European countries, especially Southern. This came up again during the election. At the same time, I think everybody agrees that the fragmented European capital markets are really hurting European banks, especially German banks. In Washington, the SPD, government is certainly, or a SPD-led government would be considered sort of forward-leaning on that issue. Do you think that a completion of the banking union is at all realistic in a new government?
So I think European issues are probably some of the more difficult ones, because traditionally you've had quite different positions. With the Liberal Party being fairly cautious on banking union, and then wider fiscal union, maybe not so much on capital markets, and then the other two being a bit more forward. But actually, I think for the banking union, the main factor isn't so much one of these three parties, but rather the Sparkassen, so our local public banks, because they traditionally have been opposed to the banking union, have basically blocked that a little bit because they don't want common deposit insurance, because they have their own system. So for them, that would be, or they see it as disadvantageous. So I think that's actually more the main stumbling block, to get all the major banking players in Germany to agree, and then we can probably move forward on a banking union, irrespective of the parties.
And sort of on a related issue, a European safe asset with the recovery package now, I think, the Commission is really joining the ESM and EIB on mutualizing debt. Do you believe it should become permanent? What are the biggest risks from the German perspective? How do the parties see it? And do you think under a Scholz government there would be significant prospects for that?
Sure. I mean, so for now, that question isn't really on the table, right? I mean, parties have their stance on it, but it's not, no one is going to make this permanent or not right now. I think what everybody's waiting to see is how Next Gen EU, so the current funds, how they basically work out, and how they are being spent. And I think that's actually what's going to matter a lot for the future discussion here, is, do we actually see a tangible benefit for Europe from these funds? Do we see that Europe is getting out stronger? Do we see investments that actually are growth enhancing in the future? I think that's what everybody, and probably especially more skeptical parties, will be looking at. And I think what all those in favor have to do is probably bring out that story and work on that one first, rather than now going all in for advancing permanent European debt. And I think once everybody seems to be on board that actually this was a good thing, then we can talk about permanent European debt. What that leaves out a little bit, but I think that dynamic may change when we kind of progress and the currently outstanding bonds mature, is I'm sure financial markets will also have an opinion on this. I mean, those bonds have been very, very popular with investors, and once they get close to being paid out, those investors will probably want European bonds again. So it's going to be quite interesting what role they end up playing.
Thank you for that. And it's obviously, I mean, this is something that from the Washington perspective, and that's where both Ola and I are sitting right now, we've been pushing for this for a while, right? And sort of it almost felt like, when I was in the Treasury Department writing, you would copy and paste these talking points about fiscal spending for every Germany memo, right? You would even have to think twice. But now that the Biden administration is really pushing, and again, this is a live issue right now in Washington with the infrastructure bill. How do you think that what is the message do you think that a new German government might have to the Biden administration about efficient use of infrastructure targeted funding, about green finance, et cetera?
What message they will have for the Biden administration? I mean, I think we are trying to sort ourselves out on how we're going to do all of this. I mean, that's really the big question right now is how do we, not only define what good kind of climate financing is and what it looks like and how big it should be, but also how you do it well. So actually, in that case, I mean, I guess a few of us economists here are looking to the US and think that you're a little bit further in this. I mean, might not be true. But we are still in earlier stages of the discussion how we define how much investment we actually need and what mechanisms we need to actually translate it into tangible progress.
Fair enough. It's funny that you say that because a lot of the conversations I've had in Washington often say, oh, the Europeans are further ahead of us in some of this thinking. So there's clearly a lot to learn on both sides. But maybe as a final question, maybe you could tell us a little bit more about your own work, right? And your think tank is really sort of has rockets behind it, and I know that you have some really fresh ideas about targeting full employment.
Thank you. That's a huge compliment. Feels more like we're screwing the wheels on and trying to do something useful in the meantime. But so what we're trying to do is we try and take a step back, do exactly the work you can't do in a German Ministry of Finance on a day-to-day basis because you don't really have time. So you think about what does good fiscal policy actually look like, rather than just answering the question of whether the budget this year or next year is all right. And for that, we really try to kind of, take a slightly more global view on the budget and think about what the challenges are really for the budget. And in Germany, that is totally not, paying interest on our debt, because German bonds actually pay negative interest. So the government gets paid for issuing bonds. We had a slight issue last year because we issued less bonds than we thought we would. So we had less. We generated less revenue from that. The really big challenge for the German budget is pensions and subsidies to the public pension scheme, which is, partly the consequence of having an aging population, but also partly a result of having a labor market where, pretty much everybody has a job or had a job before the crisis, but where lots of employment isn't great. So very large low wage sector, lots of part-time employment, and then quite a lot of people work in jobs that don't have proper social security and, basically proper pension from their employer. So that means they earn some money, but just not enough to make a proper living and then pay for, the time where they're not going to be working. And that challenge for the budget is huge. Like a third of our budget nearly is going towards public pensions. As a subsidy. It's supposed to be an insurance system, but it's really not working out anymore. So if you want to think about how we make public finances sustainable, this is really what you need to tackle. And we believe that you can tackle that by looking at the labor market and, reducing low wage employment, reducing the share of people who work in part-time, which is mainly women. Because we have a problem with provision of childcare, tax incentives. We just haven't really tried, I think, very hard in the past to create good quality jobs. We focused on everybody having a job, which maybe in the 90s was the right focus, but now I think we have to shift. So that's what we are looking at. And then we try and kind of link that back really with, what does that mean for policy right now? And how can we, take concrete steps to move towards that, that are also realistic, So we put forward a proposal of how, without abolishing the debt brake, because I think that is scary for many people, how can you get closer to an economy focused on full employment with the debt brake, just by tweaking slightly how the calculations under the debt brake are done. So basically, we run our economy hot with deficit spending until we have full employment, and real full employment. Not if women in the part have just worked part-time, then we say, oh, that's all right, we just keep them in part-time. We say, hey, what about we look to Scandinavia, for instance, where a lot more women work a lot more, and voluntarily so, because they have good childcare, for instance. And we say, well, this should be the capacity of our labor market. This should be our goal. And let's do deficit spending until we're there, and we can focus this deficit spending on, creating these possibilities for women, opportunities for women. So we're trying to, on the one hand, think big picture, but then, take the incremental steps so it's actually feasible for politicians. And that's what we focus on right now. And then, yeah, we've also done some work on climate spending, but I guess that would be a second speech, which I may spare you right now.
Well, maybe we'll take you up on it in the future. It's really interesting stuff. I think similar conversations are going on in the US, especially coming out of the COVID crisis, where we see that the brunt of it was borne primarily by women and minorities. So it's I think there's a good opportunity for exchange on these issues. But Philippa, thank you so much for taking some time to talk to us today. Exciting times in Berlin. We wish you good luck with your research, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you.